What's up, everybody? Recording to you from Lafayette, Indiana. I'm in a different spot here for a biblical soul care counseling conference. This is my hotel room. And so I figured if I'm going to be in Indiana, we've done videos of the Colts for the Colts in the past. Let's talk about the Indianapolis Colts. So that's what we're doing right now. They just learned a valuable lesson I think they can get from the Super Bowl, that they can get from what Howie Roseman did with the Eagles, how he constructed that roster, because you have a good coach. Like, not only that, but you have a coach that's familiar with what is going on in Philly. All right, so we can talk about some of those things. You have a coach that's familiar with how to use a running quarterback, right? Like, all of these things, we can look to the parallels between the Colts and the Eagles, and I think the Colts can get there. The path isn't super easy, and it's going to take some fixing of Anthony Richardson, but let's look at this roster as a whole and let's see what they can do, because I really do believe they just did learn a valuable lesson. So first, I want to start by looking at the Eagles roster, and I think the best place to do this is PFF because it puts it all in one place really nice. I think it's even better than a depth chart. Zoom in if you can't see it well. But when I look at the Eagles roster, I combine it into three categories. All right. First is the haves, the big dogs, the playmakers, the ones that are eating up large portions of your salary cap. So there's the haves, there's the have-nots, and the rookies. The have-nots and the rookies, quite frankly, can be in the exact same category because none of them are getting paid a large amount of money. They just aren't. But there's not a lot of these $10 million, $15 million guys, because those are guys that they bring you a ton, but they bring you some, but not a ton, but they cost too much against the cap. Like, look, we can talk about all this kind of stuff, but here you go through the roster and you have the haves, right? You have your Darius Slays, your A.J. Browns, your Saquon Barkleys, your Jalen Hurts, your Devontae Smiths, your Mailatas, your Johnsons, right? Your Dickersons. 3 of the top 10 offensive linemen are all with the Eagles, just in case you're wondering. And then you have the guys that are the rookie contract guys. The Cooper DeJeans. Did he show up at all in the Super Bowl? The Quinyon Mitchells. You traded for Dotson, right? I'm not saying he's on. I think he might still be on a rookie deal. You got Carter here. He's not the only one that's on a rookie deal on that defensive line. You have Dean, who's on a rookie deal. And then you have the guys who they've brought in via free agency. Right? They weren't big names. They weren't anything crazy, but you have guys that were brought in on free agency on value contracts. And this is the mistake that so many teams make, is they feel like they need to bring guys in on free agency with these massive, like, inflated contracts. You don't have to do that, and quite frankly, the Colts aren't in position to do that. They brought in this offseason C.J. Gardner-Johnson, which is, I believe, their largest splash. Mekhi Becton, it looked like a bust at tackle for the Jets, but they moved him to guard, and all of a sudden he was a really good guard. Oren Burks, Zach Bond, they brought him in as a special teamer, and he ends up being an all-pro linebacker, and they traded for Jahan Dotson. None of these moves in the offseason you think are going to move the needle to an extreme amount. But when you put them all together, they fill in the pieces with the haves and the have-nots. And there are so many studs that the have-nots end up being really, really good. So let's look at the Indianapolis Colts and how close they are. Because when I look at the Eagles, what I see right here is I see a really good offensive line and I see a really good defensive line. And if you put any play into PFF, right, and their, what they do, then what you'll see when you look at the Colts is you see a good offensive line, and I think has the ability to be great, all right, especially on the left side. And then you see a really good defensive line that are a healthy Latu away from possibly being really, really good. With Buckner and Stewart on the interior, that's huge. That should help your linebackers. Don't kid yourself. One of the biggest reasons Bond ended up being the highest graded linebacker and Nakobe Dean ended up being a top 15 linebacker, according to PFF, is because of the big bodies in front of them. The Colts have the ability to do the same thing. So the question is who are your haves, who are your have-nots on this team, right? You have two or three haves and money on the offensive line. Jonathan Taylor is a have. Michael Pittman is a have, right? Now what you need to do is you need to go out in free agency and you need to sign some of these other guys. Not anything crazy, but some of the other guys. Look at the guys you're paying. You have $31 million in cap space. Not a ton. Not a ton. But that money is not going to wasted players either. It's going to DeForest Buckner. It's going to Pittman. It's going to Quentin Nelson. It's going to Braden Smith, which, by the way, with Braden Smith, I'm just going to go ahead and say this right now. If you feel like you can do something different at right tackle or you want to do something different at right tackle, you save $16 million. All right, you save $16 million with a cut or a trade or see what you can get out of that. All right, you have Jonathan Taylor, Grover Stewart. I'll take it. All right, Kwity Paye, Kenny Moore, and now you're and then very quickly, once you get below this $5 million threshold, you're at the have-nots. All right, you're at the have-nots, and they're already getting good play out of certain players on the have-nots, because I'm not calling them have-nots because they're not good players. I'm calling them have-nots because they don't have a big salary. So they do not tax your team that much. Then when you combine that with this, they hold every single one of their picks in the draft this year. They've not done anything with it. So they are drafting in the first half of every single round of the seven picks. They can absolutely do good in this pool. So here's what I guess I want to say about the Colts. They're a team that's been a 500-ish team over the last 2 years. And a lot of people are asking the same questions about Anthony Richardson that they asked about Jalen Hurts, which is, will he ever be accurate enough? Will he ever? But the difference between Richardson and Hurts is that Hurts, it was a question of, is the arm strength there? Is the throwing mechanics broken? That's not a question with Richardson. It's more a question of just, is the accuracy there? And that was a question for Hurts too. So he actually has one less thing to overcome. But they both have the legs. They both have the feet. The question is, what can you do on this roster around him to make it a little bit easier? And that is one of the differences. I truly think one of the big differences between Hurts and Richardson is Hurts is out there throwing to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, while Richardson is throwing to guys who are good receivers. Pittman is a good receiver. Josh Downs is a good receiver. Pierce is a fast receiver. They're just not great. And so, there's great receivers in Philly. So the question is, what do you do with the have pieces that you have? So I think that they learned quite a bit from the Eagles, and I think what they can do in this is realize, all right, let's spend smartly in free agency, and let's try and hit a couple of home runs in the draft, and you could have a very, very quick from a 9-8, 8-9 team, and all of a sudden you're looking at an 11-6, 12-5 team, and who knows what can happen. Also, that would happen just by a little development by the quarterback. All right, thanks for watching. See you on the next one.